Alrighty, hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Laura and today I wanted to talk to you guys about buying your first home. I know it's kind of it's a topic that we like to talk about, but also we don't like to talk about. And I did not really think that I would be someone sitting here in my 20s having bought my first home with my husband, which we did almost 3 years ago. So we bought kind of in the middle of COVID. And there was a lot of learnings along the way, some of which we kind of managed to get before buying the house and some of which we kind of learned retrospectively. But I wanted to run through some things with you guys today. Stick around towards the end because I will actually be running through like the detailed financials of how we made the decision to actually go ahead with purchasing our first home, and that's kind of the like detailed important stuff. But there is also a lot that I'm going to be talking about today that is still really important to consider when looking at if you want to buy a home, or if you are buying a home, the things that are going to be important for you to consider when weighing up different options. So let's get into it. Just for a bit of background so you understand my experience of buying our first home, we bought in November 2020. So this was when interest rates were really low. We locked in a rate that was under 3% at that time. We bought in Auckland. We chose to buy an existing home rather than a new home, and it is an older home. We went for concrete block, as you can tell behind me, which has turned out to be really, really solid. We bought a place that is not on a freehold title, so it's not just like sitting on its own land, you can do whatever you want. This is in partnership with other units that is managed by a body corporate. Now, it's actually managed very well, and I'll talk a bit more about that later and why that's actually a really good idea in a lot of instances. We bought a place that we knew needed a lot of work, but more superficial work, nothing structural. The roof had already recently been done, the windows had recently been done. So it was all inside the home that stuff needed to be done, and stuff that we knew we could either learn to do ourselves, mostly me, or get family to help us with, and that is what we have done. So that's kind of setting the scene for what we have experienced. We also bought more centrally within Auckland rather than in the outer suburbs. We tried to keep the location fairly central for commute and public transport. All right, so first thing to consider, and I say it's the first thing because this is likely going to change where you can look, what your financing options are, what you need to consider in terms of condition, etc. And that is, do you want to buy new, like brand new, or quite new, or do you want to buy existing? Now the different options here, I know that in New Zealand, if you're buying brand new, like off the plans, there are different financing options available, like with the government assistance, if you are buying brand new and this is your first home. So that is something to consider there. However, with those brand new homes, particularly like the Kiwi build type things, a lot of them are in more of the satellite suburbs that kind of can eliminate close to the city. And a lot of the time, for us at least, and I'm guessing in other places, the brand new builds that are close to the city are quite expensive. They always seem to be doing luxury townhouses rather than practical townhouses around here. But anyway, so if it's brand new, that's going to change your options. If it's fairly new, I know that here there have been issues with new builds just not really standing up to the test of time like you would experience, or you end up buying a place that's basically as functional as an older place, but it has all these nice fixtures that look really gross after like 3 years. So it's something to consider around the quality of the newer homes wherever you are located, and see if this is actually worthwhile, or if you're going to end up having to replace a bunch of stuff or just have it look just as shoddy as a much older place, that cost you more. So it's something to consider. The other thing with older places though is that certain things only last a certain amount of time. So older homes in New Zealand often have wooden window frames, which other countries can't believe. But if you have that, you're going to need to do maintenance to keep those from rotting, or if they're too far gone, you're probably going to need to replace them. Same thing with roofs. Roofs, from what I understand, generally have like a 30-year kind of life on them, and it may be even less if it hasn't been maintained properly and cleaned and all of that prior to you taking it on. So that's kind of the flip side, is that if you buy older, there may be major things that you need to do, or major things that you need to watch out for based on the decade it was built, whatever sort of building issues they happen to have during that time. So that's why I say it's kind of important to decide early on, because the things you're going to be looking at and considering and trying to figure out are going to be totally different based on if it's brand new off the plans, a newer build, or an older build, and that's going to really change. You can kind of be looking at all of those all at once. It's just going to be a lot to kind of deal with. But anyway, they're all different. They've all got something different to consider, and it's worth considering it. Generally, are your expectations realistic? If you are going into this and what you are expecting, you cannot see in the market within your price range at all, nothing close to it, and you keep being disappointed by things over and over and over, you might want to come back and question, are your expectations realistic? And there's a lot of different factors here and a lot of different reasons as to why maybe your expectations are not aligning. I know that for us, I really struggled with us not being able to find a place that had an internal access garage. We could not afford anything with an internal access garage, and I really wanted it, and it's really convenient, and people around us who are older than us and have much nicer homes than us were telling us like, oh my god, you have to have that, you have to have it, it's so terrible not having it, you have to. What I realized was that no, we didn't have to, like we wouldn't die, the home wouldn't be completely useless, like we wouldn't be able to not live there if we didn't have an internal access garage. And that was one thing that I really had to reevaluate my expectations on. And you know what? After a while, I looked at places and I went, it has an internal access garage, we're not going to be able to afford it, because people love that. People think that's necessary. They will pay so much for that. We just can't afford that place, that's it. If you're watching this from a less intense housing market right now, you might be going, oh my god, that's ridiculous that you couldn't afford a place with that. Yeah, I know, okay, it's it's tough times. I know that, shout out to one of my really good friends, Becca Loveless. I will link her channel down below. She is in Vancouver at the moment, and I think that their housing market would be even more competitive than ours. So she would totally understand what I'm talking about here, where even the most basic expectations, you just have to go, nah, it's not possible. Take it off the list. Stop looking for it. Stop saying it's a requirement, because it ain't gonna happen. So anyway, just generally manage your expectations around things. All right, questions 3 and 4. Oh, 3 and 4. Do you want a do-up? And how much of a do-up do you want? So we knew that we wanted a do-up because we wanted to be able to add value to it, make it nicer, and then sell it on to someone who just needed a property that was like ready to go. So we wanted to get a place that maybe an investor wouldn't be as interested in because it didn't look very nice, it didn't feel very nice, so you wouldn't be able to just like easily rent it out. So we wanted that aspect of a do-up, but we really didn't want to be getting ourselves into a place that like the roof needed replacing, the windows needed replacing, there were structural issues, walls needed to be replaced, you know, all of that. We really wanted to keep it manageable, more on the aesthetic side of things, and that was a big deal for us. And I maybe wanted to go more towards the do-up. Like, I'm very much like a, yeah, I can do that. I have no idea, but like, that's why YouTube exists. And my husband is less so like that. So we kind of had to respect each other in that and go, we need to find somewhere in the middle where we can be happy, where I don't feel like we're paying for stuff that we could just do ourselves. You know, it looks nice because of this, but we could easily do that ourselves. We don't want to buy too nice because then we're paying too much. And he didn't want to be buying too gross, where it would be too much stress and too much work for us to actually get it looking nice by the time we wanted to then sell. So we had to find a nice happy medium. And if you are looking at somewhat of a do-up, and if you're buying with someone else, you two will probably also have slightly different expectations of what constitutes a do-up and what is like too much and what is kind of the right amount. So you may have to get into kind of nitty-gritty details there of what that actually looks like, and then you just have to be honest with yourself when you're looking at a property going, is this just going to be too much work for us? And it can be disappointing and it can be hard to go, oh, this could be amazing and I can imagine it, but holy moly, this would be too much work. But you got to manage that, because you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you've bitten off more than you can chew. All right, so when it comes to evaluating places that you're looking at, wondering if this would be like a good place for you to buy, there's a lot of different factors to consider, and I'll try run through all the major ones. Firstly, is it close to amenities and is it accessible to your work? For us, we have bus systems and a train system. Now, I feel really bus sick when I go on buses, and it's very up and down here in Auckland, so I struggle with the buses. So for us, we were more looking at either particular bus routes that I know are smoother, I keep track of this, or the train lines, and you want it to be within like walking distance of the train lines realistically. Particularly for us, there is no parking at the train stations around here, so we have to be able to walk there. So that was a big deal for us, and honestly, it becomes this like evaluating properties by going into Google Maps with your work, or sort of the area that you generally end up working in if maybe you're not quite sure on your job, and where the property is, and going, how far do I have to walk to public transport? How long does that public transport take? How frequent is that public transport? Because if stuff gets cancelled and there's only one bus every half hour, so you're now going to be possibly an hour late, it's not going to be a good time. So definitely look at what it's like for accessibility if you drive. How easy is it to get like on the motorway or the main roads to where you need to get to for work, or if it's for school or daycare or whatever. So really have a good look at that. Also, sometimes even if it looks okay geographically, if it's in a really, really awkward street, it can be really hard to actually get out like onto main roads to actually get to where you're needing to get to. So have a look at that. Don't set yourself up to have a bad time every time you try drive to work, right? The next thing to consider for your purposes is what kind of title is it? Here in New Zealand, we have freehold, which is where you just like, you own the house and you own the land around it, and that's yours to kind of do what you want to within the council restrictions of like how high you can build and building consent and all that kind of stuff. But it's yours to do what you want with. We have a few other types. We have freehold and stratum, which is kind of similar to just like a general unit title, and it's actually similar to cross lease, which is different to leasehold. It's not that you are just renting the land and you're having to pay like 20 grand a year for it. Cross lease is where, which is what we have, multiple units own the land. They have their own set areas that are just theirs, and then they have shared areas which everyone is responsible for. I think freehold and stratum is slightly less particular on that, but it ends up kind of functioning the same. So with that, and again, people were telling us, just like with the internal access garage, they were like, you have to get freehold. Like, you don't want the headache of potentially having to share the land. Like, anything could happen. People could decide to come into your little fenced backyard and have a party and you can't stop them. And I'm like, no one would do that. No one would have their own little fenced backyard and then you've got yours and they decide to just come into yours for no reason. Like, people aren't that weird, I don't think. Comment below if people are that weird. But we could not afford freehold. That's also what all the investors want, because then they can build up on those. They can't do it on like a freehold and stratum or a leasehold title. So anyway, we could not afford freehold, but it just meant that when we did look at buying a unit on a type of unit title, we just had to be aware of what that then meant and make sure that we understood what the implications were. So just be aware of what it is that you're buying so you don't go into something. I know that there are some where it's freehold and stratum where there are two properties next to each other that like share the same title, and they can be totally separate houses, but technically it's freehold and stratum across all that land. So hypothetically with that, you could own that, but you couldn't knock down and like build, you know, a multi-story thing if the people next door didn't agree to that, because you are sharing the land, right? So be aware of what you're buying into. It can really matter. Most of the time, I think it's actually fine. So don't get too freaked out about that, but just definitely be aware of what you're going into and make sure that it meets your needs. Be aware of how multi-units are managed. So if you are looking to get a townhouse or a unit or an apartment where you are sharing space with other people and it's not just you on your own little block, you need to be aware of how that is managed. In New Zealand, there is this big thing against body corporates. Everyone loves to hate on the body corporates. Now, how this works is that we pay in a set amount each year, and that covers off our insurance and maintenance of the communal grounds. Now, the insurance is a really important piece because it can get really nasty if, let's say, our neighbours had a fire and it damaged our property and they have separate insurance and we have separate insurance and it's not a joint insurance, things can get really bad. So there's just a risk that you run there when it's not actually done the way it needs to, based on like the fact that the buildings are touching, right? So we really like that, and it ends up being really reasonable. And then for the maintenance of the grounds, now this can be an issue because at the beginning it's totally fine, but when stuff starts getting old, and these units have been here since the 70s, everyone uses this driveway that we have. And if we're not all contributing to that, it can end up being this really bad situation where certain people, if you were just doing this voluntarily, self-organizing, certain people could just decide not to pay into this, but others really hate the fact that the driveway is terrible, so they'll just pay out to get it done, even though someone else is benefiting from it. So it can get really nasty and stuff just ends up not getting done. I would say that where you have more than like 4 units, you really want there to be some kind of body corporate or similar actually managing what's happening with all of the communal ground. Otherwise, it's just kind of quite lawless and anything can happen, and we really weren't keen on that. So body corporates are not the big bad guys. Make sure that it is well functioning, because you don't want to walk into a scenario where it's not, because to me that would be quite ugly. So when you're looking at properties like that, you can ask for a copy of the like previous year's body corporate annual meeting minutes, so you can see what happened and you can see, were most people in attendance, like did they discuss stuff, did they sign off on stuff, did they, you know, do they have money in the bank to actually pay for everything they're doing, all of that. So it's a really good idea if you're buying a multi-unit to understand how that will be managed. You don't want to leave everything up to chance on that one. Does the property that you're buying have specific lending rules that may apply? I have no idea what these would be in other countries, but in New Zealand, firstly, the basic deposit that you require to buy a home in New Zealand is 20%. You can go on the like 5%, and they do a certain number of those, but we really didn't want to be on those interest rates. So 20% is kind of the standard. If you are buying a home that is currently tenanted, and let's say you really want it and it's still got tenants in it on a contract for the next 4 months, and you're like, that's fine, we can stay in our rental, then move in after that. If you're buying a place that's tenanted, you need to have a 30% deposit. We got caught out by this, and we almost had some really big problems with the bank, because we were given pre-approval to go to auction on a property that was currently tenanted, and we said that to them in writing, and they in writing gave us pre-approval for our mortgage. And then the bank realized that it was actually tenanted. They hadn't read their own documentation. So anyway, that was almost a really bad thing. But be aware of that, and maybe even just do like a specific lookup in your country if there are specific lending rules that apply for properties that are rented, if you're thinking that you might buy a place that's currently rented out to someone else and then move in after, 4, 5, 6 months. The other one is that in New Zealand, if you are buying a property that is under 50 square meters, which is about 540 square feet, so it's small, but it's not like teeny tiny. If you're buying a property that's under 50 square meters, you can only borrow up to 50% of the property's value. Now, what that means is that if you're looking at buying an apartment that is $500,000, that is how it is in New Zealand, by the way, in Auckland. If you're looking at buying an apartment that's $500,000 and it's 45 square meters, you can only borrow $250 of that 500. So you would have to have $250,000 deposit to buy that apartment. Now, if you were looking at one that was 55 square meters and was also $500,000, you can borrow easily 80% of that value. So then the deposit required is $100,000 rather than $250,000. It's also nuts because if you had a deposit of $250,000, you could buy $1 million home. So I don't know why you'd be buying this tiny apartment. But anyway, that is what the lending rules are in this country. So you may have specific things in your country. Be aware of those before you start looking at a bunch of these places, getting really invested, and then finding out that there's no way you can get financing for it. It's a waste of time. It was a waste of time for us. Don't let it be a waste of time for you. Risk of slips or floods. I feel like this is becoming so relevant. There were floods in Brisbane. There are currently floods in New York. It seems like there's floods everywhere, and with the cyclone that we had earlier this year in Auckland, there was a lot of flooding and a lot of slips. So be aware of the risk of flooding and slips wherever you are buying. There seems to be, in most places, like a council or government resource that you can use to look up what the documented like land issues are everywhere in the city. Might be different in the country, but in the city, you can definitely look at that. So have a look and see if there are any major risks for the property that you are buying on. There's always going to be some stuff kind of nearby, or like where creeks overrun or whatever. There's always going to be little things here and there, but just check that there's not going to be anything major on the property that you are wanting to buy. Obviously, this does not constitute like proper property advice or anything, so just that little disclaimer. I will put that out here now, halfway through the video. But generally, try and avoid those big ones. Little ones are maybe a bit more manageable, and maybe where you live, there is always going to be risks of certain things. You know, if you live in a very hilly city, maybe there's always a slight risk of slips, but look out for the major stuff. Proximity to deal breakers. This may be deal breakers for you, or it may be deal breakers for when you want to sell this home in like 3, 5, 10 years time, and then realize why no one wanted it when you bought it, okay? So deal breakers could be large power pylons. People don't like them. They get weirded out by them. They feel like there's weird electrical stuff, and maybe there is. I seem to remember that it wasn't clear, but people really don't like them. So be aware of that. Substations, where they are like doing the whole transformer stuff with the power. Again, same thing with the weird electromagnetic whatever. Maybe try avoid those if you can. Motorways. If you cannot be next to a motorway, don't do it. Pollution, sound. It's a bad time. Obviously, someone has to live next to the motorways, we get it, but if you have a choice, stay away. Dangerous main roads. If your driveway goes out onto like a busy, fast-moving main road, it's just going to be more likely that someone ends up having an accident, or if you have kids and they're walking out next to that, it's just not a great idea. So if you can try be on slightly quieter streets rather than the big main road, it's going to make it more attractive both for you and for the next people that you probably want to sell to. Are you near to like a sewage processing station or anything like that? You know, are you downwind of where the most common wind is from that area? You get it. If you're near to like industrial areas, generally, just be aware of what you're getting near to and try avoid the stuff that's going to be really smelly, that's going to have a lot of pollutants, or that's going to be really loud. School zones. Now this is a double whammy, because you may want to find out where the school zones are for the schools that you want to be in, if it's like a zoned catchment for the school. That is really important. You don't want to find out that you're actually one street over from where you thought you needed to be, having bought a property, right? So be aware of the school zones that you want to be in and try get in those if that's important for you. But in a contrasting way, if there are expensive school zones, let's say you have 2 girls and there's an expensive boys' school, but there's a zoning area and everyone tries to get in that zoning area, you don't want to be paying to be in an expensive zoning area if you're not actually going to use that, right? Because then you're paying extra for something that you're not going to use. So try to avoid that as well. In Auckland, that's a big deal. And when we were looking, we basically said we cannot go in any of these areas because that's where everyone is trying to buy for the school zoning, and we do not need the school zoning. So just be aware of that, either to get in the right zoning or to stay out of other zoning to save yourself money. Figure out before you go for a place if there's going to be stiff competition. For us, when we were buying, this looked like asking ourselves, will we be competing with investors? There is a big investment property market here in New Zealand. It's a very attractive asset for people to buy. So investors are always looking for little properties that they can pick up and add onto their little list of money makers, right? But due to the healthy home standards here in New Zealand, a lot of rentals and things that investors would want to buy are having to be upgraded before they can be rented out. And this then becomes a barrier for investors wanting to buy places. So if you can figure out a place that is fine for you and that you know that you can make nice enough for yourself, but that investors won't be as keen to touch because they'd have to do work on it, that would take time in order to get it up to scratch to actually legally be able to be rented out, this is a good chance for you to get in. Now, you don't want it to be major issues, but for example, when we bought this, it had no heating, which may sound crazy to some people overseas, but yeah, literally zero heating. There was nothing. It's just 4 walls and a roof and a floor, right? But investors know that in order to rent out, they have to have a proper source of heating in the living area in order for it to be classified as a healthy home. So we knew that that was one barrier, and there was a couple of others as well actually, for investors to be able to buy this and be interested in it. So that helped us to think that there would be less competition for this place compared to some of the other places that we'd looked at that already had those requirements set up. So we knew that this would be a great opportunity for us to get in, where there would be less competition, and also, going back to the beginning, know that we could add value and it would be a bit of a do-up without being like a major thing. Following on from that, be aware of the problems that a property has and how easy they are to fix. Now this can even be when you're looking at like a new build. You may be looking at it going, oh, well, this room does not have a wardrobe and we really want to have a wardrobe in there. We can just get a good freestanding wardrobe that goes in there. That solves that problem, right? You know, that can be an issue with a new build that is easy to solve. For us, it was looking at it going, it does not have a source of heating, we can install that, that's fine. The walls are all different shades of beige, we can fix that, we can paint walls, that is fine. There was one place that we looked at and we were considering buying, but we knew that there was a risk there because under the sink on that bottom level of that MDF cupboard was all warped because water had been leaking. Now we don't know how long water was leaking for, and it's quite possible that that could have been leaking to the subfloor, which was covered with tiles, and then the subfloor was going to be damaged, and we didn't know how far that had spread out in the house. So if you see signs of something like that and you don't know how big of a problem it is, that's when alarm bells should be going, right? And it's possible to investigate that kind of thing and get a builder to look at that before you buy, but know how big of a problem you are signing up for. We also found some places where the edges of the rooms were sagging and the bottoms of the walls looked moldy. And for us, that was a really big red flag because the roof also didn't look fantastic. So in our mind, it's quite possible that the roof was leaking and it was damaging everything up in the roof. The water was coming down the inside of the walls and was damaging through there and then getting to the floor and damaging there. So again, that's a very big systemic issue and a lot of stuff that would potentially need to be uncovered and then replaced. Whereas something like a broken fence, you can see what the problem is. The fence needs to be fixed, maybe some parts need to be replaced. That is an easier thing to deal with than a sagging corner of a room, right? So those two things are not created equal, and it's good to remember that. Be aware of the market generally. When we were looking to buy, things were moving really, really quickly, and also most things were going to auction. So for us to meet the market where it was at that time, we had to be able to go to auction if we really wanted a place, and that was available to us. We were able to get the pre-approval for that, so we tried to be aware of that, and also move quickly. And we knew that if we couldn't move quickly on something because we were going to be like away for a weekend or something and couldn't view it then, we knew that there was no point looking at that because it would go. So just be aware of the market, and it may be that if you keep missing out on places, you might just need to figure out times that you can actually move faster on stuff, and maybe you just have to have a couple of weeks off from that. But if the market's moving quickly and you're not moving quickly enough, it just goes back to that like expectations and frustration piece, right? You need to be prepared to meet the market where it is at, or if you really, really can't, know what your limitations are on that and make sure that you work around that as best you can. Alrighty, and as I promised you, the numbers. So this is figuring out if this is actually going to be a sound decision for you financially. So there's kind of a basic calculation that I used when we were looking at this, and I'll run you guys through that right now. I'll try and do it as simply as I can, and it kind of exists in 3 parts, 2 parts, 4 parts. The first part is working out how much money is just going to be going down the drain and you will never get back. Let's say you are renting a place currently for $600 a week or $2,400 a month, okay? So that is the money that you are never going to get back. We're assuming that your bills like for power, electricity, water are all just going to stay the same during this, but $2,400 a month just on rent. That's the money that you're not going to get back. Let's say that you bought a place and the repayments on the mortgage meant that you were paying, let's say $1,500 a fortnight, so $750 a week or $3,000 a month, right? Now within that is going to be some interest and some principal. So some of it's going for the interest of the money that you've borrowed, and some of it is going back to pay back the original mortgage amount. So the interest is the stuff that you're never going to see again, and the mortgage amount principal is the money that you will get back if you were to, let's say, sell it in a year for the same price you bought it at. The assumption being that it's selling at the same price or more. That's the money that you would then get back on that. So let's say that it was then $3,000 a month for the whole mortgage payment, but $1,500 of that is interest and $1,500 of that is principal. So now our first test of is more money going down the drain? The answer is no, because rent would be $2,400 versus interest is $1,500. So you are already saving money there at a rate of $900 a month. So hold on to that figure. The next piece of the puzzle is to look at the money that you would use as a deposit for the house. How much would you be earning on that in like the stock market or an investment fund or the bank on term deposit compared to what you are getting for that as principal paid back over the space of a year, which I kind of in my mind use as like an interest earned on that money. It's not exactly correct, but it's kind of a good guesstimate. So let's say the deposit that you need to put down on this property is $120,000. Now, if we were assuming that you were earning 6% of that annually, and I'm just going to do it as a straight annual rate, not like a compounding every month, but you could do it that way to be slightly different. 6% annual flat rate. That would mean that on that $120,000, if it was in the stock market earning 6%, you would get $7,200 from that over the course of the year. So now we're going to break that down to monthly. 7,200 divided by 12 is 600. Okay, so if you had just carried on renting and that money was in the stock market, that would be $600 a month that you were earning on that. You are also saving $600 a month straight into your bank account compared to the principal that you're paying back if you buy a house being $1,500 a month. So what you are losing is then the $2,400 in rent minus what you get back in the stock market, which then takes it to losing $1,800 a month, minus the $600 that you're saving a month, which then takes it to losing $1,200 a month. The other way around, you would be paying $1,500 a month in interest, earning $1,500 a month in principal, so it ends up totaling out to a net zero lost. Doesn't help when I made it exactly the same numbers, so it sounds like a net zero. But anyway, the point being is that you are earning more for your money by using it to help provide you housing. And because the principal that you are paying back and essentially having in the bank ready for you when you sell is higher than you would be getting in the stock market with that money, it may then be a better option for you to do that rather than renting. Now again, this does not constitute exact like financial advice here, and you would have to check the numbers for yourself, and this also very much assumes that you would be selling the property at the same price that you bought it at and that it's not going to go lower. So just keep that in mind. If the property price was going to go up, however, you could then take that into account on your calculation. So let's say the property was worth $600,000 when you bought it, and you're expecting the property market to go up 1% per year, and you want to sell in 5 years. I'm not going to do the compounding percentage, I'm just going to do it as 5%, okay? That would then mean that the property price would go up by $30,000. Now that $30,000 then goes back to you. That doesn't go to the bank. So let's say that you had paid back, I can't do the full functioning mortgage calculation, but anyway, let's say that over that time, so the guesstimation is paying back $90,000 in principal on your mortgage and an extra $30,000 in capital gains over the space of 5 years is $120,000 earned on the original $120,000 that you put down on the property. So if this is the kind of market that you're looking at, that may be a really good reason for you to buy a property. If you're looking at a much more difficult market where you're not quite sure what's going to be happening, staying renting always provides you with more flexibility, I would say. So yeah, that is the financials. If you want to use those, use them. If you don't want to, don't. This isn't proper financial advice, but it is the kind of thinking that we use to decide if we wanted to buy a property here in Auckland. Okay, this ended up being a slightly longer video than I had initially anticipated, but just to kind of round out all of that thinking. Firstly, This is not proper property or financial advice. This is just my thoughts and stuff that I found important to consider when we were buying our first home, and things that you may also want to consider. The second thing to note is that you will never find the perfect first home. It doesn't exist. There are always going to be trade-offs between the location, the house, and the price that you are paying. And that will carry on for the rest of your life, but especially right now. You can't be as picky and choosy as you can generally later in life, and so there will always be things that will go wrong. We had our sink clog massively the second day of being here, and we had to call someone out to do like this full-on like pumping, declogging of the drain, right? And we've had some surprises while we've been renovating. It will always happen. So know that there is no perfect property out there. You just have to find one that vaguely meets your criteria enough and that has problems that you feel are in your control enough for you to be able to take the plunge, buy your first home. It is a really scary thing, but it's also a really exciting thing. So if you're watching this thinking about buying your first home, or even just reflecting back on the process that you went through and wondering what you would do differently next time, I hope that this has been valuable and helpful. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more content around mental health, minimalism, and lifestyle generally. So take care everyone, and I will see you next week. Bye.